So first of all, I do want to thank Jack for inviting me to the Erie Rotary today, and I'm recording this today with a friend of mine, Jamie Stewart from Mega Media Factory, and I'll explain that a little bit as we go on, but anytime I talk about manufacturing, which is something I'm very passionate about, I like to document it. And again, I'll explain that in a little bit. When Jack introduced me today, he introduced me as the tool and die guy, and I never started off life wanting to be the tool and die guy. But I was born into a manufacturing family here in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I'm sure some of you might remember the original Kerner Tool and Die Company that was up on Gospel Hill. Probably most of you would remember Gospel Hill Golf Club and probably played some golf there through the years. And then, of course, a lot of people come to me a lot and get confused with me and the R.M. Kerner Company. And they're still in business over on off McClelland Avenue. I know my Uncle Ron, when I worked there as a draftsman back in the 70s, there was over 600 employees there, machinists. So not 600 people there anymore. So I love to talk about manufacturing, and believe me, when I get a chance to talk to a group like the Rotary, local business leaders, I take it very seriously, and I really appreciate, again, Jack, the opportunity to be here. So everything was moving along just fine as a child. Again, with this manufacturing family, my grandfather had taught his sons to be tool and die makers and machinists in his home up on Cochrane Street, which still stands today. And he would go on to my uncle Ron, again, R.M. Kerner Company. My uncle Ed was Kerner Tool and Die Company. And then my father, Fritz, was the general manager at the Kerner Tool and Die Company. Well, in 1969, I was 9 years old, and it was a tough year. My father, Fritz, he passed away in May of 1969. And then 6 months later, Eddie, my Uncle Ed, who owned Kerner Tool and Die, he passed away. So that was a big hit for my legacy and my way of looking at the trade, because that was our life, hanging out at the shops. We were always up at the shop doing something, getting soda, taking some dies out of the furnace on the weekend. It was just part of your life. As a kid, I knew nothing else. Well, that all abruptly came to an end. And then my aunt sold Kerner Tool and Die about a year later, and 2 years later, in 1974, it burned to the ground. Nothing left. So my legacy as a 12-year-old, 14-year-old at the time was kind of in tatters at that point. I had no male figures in my life to kind of point me in which direction I wanted to go. And that's not a complaint. That's just the way it was. But one thing I did end up with was my father's toolbox, which was, I knew it was supposed to be mine. One day when I was a child, I was walking through the shop with my father, and he pointed to a toolbox. He said, "That's going to be yours someday." My brother ended up with it, and I harassed him endlessly for the next 3 years until he handed it over. And I still use that toolbox every day, every single day, which is a great reminder of my father and my family's legacy in the tool and die industry. I always like to say I wish my dad would have left some money in that toolbox, but even if he had, I think my brother Fred would have ended up with it anyways. So moving forward through high school, it dawned on me that I really wanted to restore my family's history and legacy in the trade. So I ended up taking an apprenticeship at a really great company in town, Anson Tools and Gauges. And with so many companies, they're no longer here, but they were one of the really few places in town that took the apprenticeships very seriously. They wrote down every hour I spent on every machine, documented everything. So at the end of that 4-year apprenticeship, I had 8,000 hours of training. And it was an interesting story because back then when we talk about training now, they were so serious about their apprentices and who they hired, they put me through an interview process. First, I had to take an aptitude test, and I don't see enough places doing that. Some people aren't mechanically inclined, and that's okay, but they might not be great tool makers or machinists if they're not. So they gave me a kind of a simple aptitude test. I passed that, and then they called me in for an interview. Now, I was just an apprentice, 1979. They brought me in, and there were 7 people in that room, the owner's room and his office. And I remember it was Mr. Anderson, 2 shop foremen, his secretary, the vice president of the company. Some of you guys might remember Joe Leto. I don't know if he's still, Joe Leto. And there were 7 of us. And I remember I had a tie on like this. It was 19. It was like this outside. And I sat there. I was sweating so hard. And these guys just kept grilling me. And at the end of the meeting, Mr. Anderson looked at me and says, "So where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I said, "I want to own my own shop." And everybody was like, who says that in an interview? You know, and he hired me. And throughout the years, he'd come over to me and say things like, "If you ever start your own shop, remember this." And I remember one tip he gave me: everybody always wants to buy their own building. Don't buy your own building. Put the money in the equipment. Make sure you get your equipment going, then get a building. So over the years, he would give me that advice, and I would move on in my tool career and finally end up owning my own shop in 1991. And again, back to my apprenticeship too. One of our requirements, though, was to go to night school, and two classes a year. I doubled up on that. I took every class the tech school and the skills center had to offer, with the idea that someday I'm going to own a shop. And I never wanted to be the dumb boss. I never wanted to be the person that I could get the wool pulled over my eyes. And it served me so well as the years went past. An employee might be doing something, and I'd say, this seems to be taking a while. And they'd say, yes, it's tough. And I'd say, well, why don't you try it this way? And inevitably, they say, you can't do it that way. And it was always a pleasure of mine to move them over and say, let me show you how to do it that way. And I still have guys call me to this day that really appreciate the training they got all those years ago. But again, it was my commitment to myself to make sure they were served correctly. And for those guys who aren't from manufacturing, but I'm sure there's people in this room that have probably worked for a boss that really didn't know what they were doing, and it's tough on the whole organization. So I wanted to have the credibility to start. So I started my own shop in 1991, and I ran them till 2003. That's when I shut down my operations. Everything kind of came to a halt, and if you look back at the tool and die industry, 2001, 2002, 2003 were rough years. And it's easy to blame. I was the same way. NAFTA is just such an easy word, NAFTA. The NAFTA just did it. But my research shows me, and it makes more sense, that in 2001, I believe, we let China into the World Trade Organization. And the results of that were not only catastrophic, but they were instant. Within a year, my clients were asking for me to do my work 10 cents on the dollar. So what I would charge $30,000 for now, plastic injection mold, they wanted done for $3,000. And of course, I had more than that invested in the steel. It was not even close. It was that bad. So when the prices got slashed to that kind of a value, that was time to close the doors. So here I am, age 43, and I have to reinvent myself. And if you've never done that, it's really fun. You should do it sometime. It's an interesting time. But my wife Heidi and I, as Jack mentioned, we started a group at the time called Erie Power Networking. And the main reason that group was started is I had visited Heidi in California several times, and she was a member of a tremendous networking organization out there. I still remember the name of it, Women's Referral Service. And I couldn't believe all these entrepreneurs, how they were getting together, much like this, but a lot of people would be intimidated by a group like this at first. When you're brand new in business, this is a successful group, and sometimes it's nice to be around the new entrepreneurs. So we started Erie Power Networking, and the biggest reason I wanted to do that is at the end, in the tool and die industry back in the early 2000s, we had no organization to speak of together. Yes, there was the Manufacturing Association, there was a chamber. We weren't very active in that. Most of us, I would say, and I'll always tell you the truth, I think most of us joined the Manufacturing Association was to get the cheap health insurance. And when the end came, we all realized it was a big problem. We called Phil English. He was our congressman at the time. Nobody could do anything. It was a really tough ending to that time. So I really appreciated and wanted to put together a group of a support group for entrepreneurs and small business people that were just starting out, so what happened to me in my industry wouldn't happen to them. So in those years, I was also went right back into manufacturing. I worked for a great local company. I think they're on your placemat, ISM, Industrial Sales in Erie. I worked there as a lead tool maker and project manager. But I also sharpened up my skills in video work, photography work, web design, blogging. Not that any one of those were of end to a means, but one day I decided to put a video up on YouTube, and I had gone back to our inspection department and had them check an angle, and I didn't like the way they were checking it, and I showed them how to do it, and it dawned on me that they didn't know how to do it the right way, or at least what I thought was the right way. So I went home that night and handed a video camera to my wife, and I said, record this. Don't worry about it. You won't understand it. And I brought home some gauge blocks, and on my kitchen table, I did a video on how to check an angle. So, believe it or not, when you put a YouTube video up, you don't know what's going to happen. Not everybody gets a million hits right away. And I watch it, typical 30 views, 50 views, 100 views. forgot about it. Well, 3 months later, I looked at it, and I had 5,000 views. I thought, wow, that's interesting. So my biggest issue I had, the pain in my life was, how could you spend 30 years learning a trade, handed down to you from your ancestors, your grandfather, your uncles, everybody, and lose it? How could you? What would you do with that knowledge? How would you not be able to share that? Because nobody was getting into the trade anymore. There really weren't apprenticeships or people asking for training. And then I found out a way for me to share all that knowledge, and I started recording these videos. And the only reason I'm the tool and die guy, because there's a lot of tool and die guys, is the website name was available. So I purchased the toolanddieguy.com and just started putting these videos up on YouTube. Today, there's, like Jack said, there's 317 videos on there. I still record a few each month, passing down the trade. And when I pass down the trade, it's a lot more than the X's and the O's and the programming and the measuring. Every once in a while, they hand me a kid at ISM to train, and some are good, some not so good. But I can tell you, when the kids are done with me, the difference is when there's a shop meeting, we walk into a room like this, and sometimes I'm a minute late or maybe on time, but the room's full. My apprentices stand up and offer me their chair. And I appreciate that because now I know they're getting not just the X's and O's and learning the trade, they're learning respect for the trade, and they're learning to respect the work that we do, because tool and die making is just a notch above a lot of the trades as far as the machine trades go. And I try to pass it down exactly the same way on my website, just not only measuring and calibration and all those minute things that come with the trade. I always try to give them life skills and things they can do to improve their lot in life. So after I shared all that knowledge, a few years before that, ironically, in 2009, does anybody remember the StoryCorps van when it came to town? They had their little mobile van, and they parked it down in front of the library. It was a Gulfstream van, and you applied, and they would record your story for StoryCorps. And StoryCorps takes that, and they put it in the Library of Congress. Now, this was before the tool and die guy. I thought, well, at least I can get this off my chest. And I spent a half an hour in there talking about manufacturing, my family's life in manufacturing. And again, this was 2009, and I didn't think another thing of it. In fact, this is so far a couple years before the tool and die guy was born online. I thought at least somewhere, someday, somebody, one of my kids ever wants to hear my story at manufacturing, their family's history, they'll have a place to hear it. Well, last summer, about this time, it was July, I got a call from StoryCorps, and they said, we're putting together a book, and we'd like to use your audio recording to put in the book. Would you be willing to do that? I said, absolutely. I have no problem with that. You know, how much do I get paid? They said, absolutely nothing, but you'll be in the book. But that's okay. Anytime, again, I can share my story in manufacturing. So it was interesting. We went through the edits. They wanted to double check, fact check, and they use interns. Interns come and go, and I kind of gave up on it. I'd call them about every 3 months. Did I make the cut? Because they record 2,000 people a year, and they were trying to keep it down to 50. And finally, last January, they called me and said, you made the cut. And the book comes out, I still remember the date, April 19th. So on April 19th, this book, Callings, The Purpose and Passion of Work, was released nationally. And my story is in there. And I was very proud and humbled, again, to have, not for me, but for my family, to someday have this story, to find out a little bit more about their dad, their grandfather, or whoever down the road. But that was a big moment in my life. So things moved along from there a little bit, and then last year I had the opportunity to be on the WJET radio. Now, for those of you who have never done a talk radio show, I'm not an expert, but I can tell you this. When they say, let's go to the phones, you have no idea what you're going to get, because in Erie, Pennsylvania, they don't have what they're called call screeners to make sure the callers are going to ask something relevant. So here I am on there talking about the book and manufacturing, and let's go to the phones. And I'm ready for, the potholes on State Street. I couldn't find parking at We Love Erie days. You got to be ready. It was so beautiful that everybody that called in wanted to talk about manufacturing. And I think the word kind of got out. A guy was on the radio that actually does this, that doesn't, and nothing wrong with the PhDs and the people in the colleges and the universities, but here's a guy that does this every day. I'm not preaching from up here down. I speak the language, and it was awesome. Everybody that called him was so polite and wanted to know more, wanted to talk about jobs, wanted to talk about GE, wanted to talk about apprenticeships, wanted to talk about wages. It was so much fun to do that. So whenever I can talk about the state of manufacturing, just to finish up, I will always give my honest opinion. And many times people come to me and they say, but I heard it's coming back. And I always say, there's zero evidence of that. Yes, in pockets it's coming back, but look at the classifieds in the paper. They used to be lined with jobs for machinists and tool makers. Not so much anymore. You're lucky to see maybe one a month. And a lot of the problems with the tool shops are they get very, very busy, then they have nothing. Then they get very, very busy, then they have nothing. And that's a hard way to work. One of the things I wanted to make sure I always cover, I believe a country has to produce its own products, or you're really not much of a country. The benefits of a healthy manufacturing sector, my little shop had 40 guys back in the 90s, and we pumped over $2 million a year into this economy. That's with wages, that's with buying utilities, steel. The things that manufacturing, my little corner, I was that big. I had a little tool and die shop, and we put $2 million back in this economy every year. And those were good wages. In 1985, I was 25 years old, and I made $65,000 that year. That's $146,000 today. And I can assure you, no tool and die makers in Erie, Pennsylvania are making $146,000. But I can say this with certainty, there's not a business in this room today that would not benefit from a healthy manufacturing base, because so much more money to go around the community. These guys buy boats when they have the money. They buy jet skis. They buy cars. They go out to eat, and then they can have a nice funeral. They eventually end up at Jack's. Always end up at Jack's.
Or burial.
And maybe our school district wouldn't be broke. It's so embarrassing that this city was lined with all these great manufacturing jobs, and I just feel like nobody knows what to do about it. In the end, I look at these hands, my two hands, and these hands have probably produced $20 or $30 million worth of products for some of the biggest companies in the world: Rubbermaid, GE, Fisher-Price. And all that work is still being done. I never wanted to be the last buggy whip maker left in town. The poor guys that were making buggy whips at the turn of the century, when the car came out, they had to reinvent themselves. The stuff I built is still being built today. Unfortunately, it's being built in the Pacific Rim in China, maybe a little bit of Mexico. But I have to say, I feel like sometimes that work was stolen from us, because it's still being done just for pennies on the dollar. And I don't think it's fair trade at all. I got an email a couple months ago when GE was talking about moving a lot of work down to Fort Worth, and somebody said, you guys can't even compete with Fort Worth. And I assured him, I never lost a job to Fort Worth. I can compete with Texas, I just can't compete with China. About a couple months ago, there was an auction here in town at a place called Ultimate Tool Company. It was the most beautiful tool and die shop I'd ever seen in my life. And the guy had 22 people. Then it went down to 5. He had one customer left. It was the medical industry, which is very high-end injection mold work. And finally, the best customer of his came to him and said, that work's going to the Philippines. Done. And he's 65. He wanted to keep working. And that shop had an auction, and that's closed. So, like I said, I like the global concept of competition, but it's just got to be fair. And my fear is we're losing a whole generation of craftsmen. Young, smart kids aren't getting into this anymore. And I don't know where we're going to end up in the trade, because everybody in the trade that knows anything anymore, for the most part, is my age and older. So we're running out of time to pass that knowledge down. So I'll take any opportunity I can get to preach the gospel of manufacturing. And the reality is, I am an advocate, but I am just one voice. And the next thing I'm doing is something called the Blue Collar Project. And what the Blue Collar Project is I love putting my videos up on YouTube. I love that to put them up and train people, but there's very little interaction. There's comments underneath. The best thing I ever did was that radio show, because it's give and take. So I'm in the process of launching this with WJT Radio, of course, a talk show for manufacturing for people who work with their hands. And again, I'm calling it the Blue Collar Project. And I really believe, in the end, that there are some people that were born to work with their hands. And I feel like there's a segment in this country now that thinks people who work with their hands aren't bright, aren't smart, don't deserve to make a good living. And believe me, I always say, if your furnace breaks in the middle of February, you're not calling Mercyhurst, you're not calling Gannon, you're going to call the guy who makes commercials tying his hot water tank to the railroad tracks and comes and rescues it. That's who you're going to call. Guys who work with their hands. So the reality is, in the end, the Blue Collar Project, I want to start that in the fall. I am looking for patrons. If anybody has an interest, loves manufacturing, would like to maybe help me out with that, I'm always open to talk about that after the meeting. But again, it's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about manufacturing, and I am always open to questions. So please fire away if you have them. All right, so the question is about VOTEC. Is it still a problem to fill VOTEC with kids? There was even a stigma back in the 70s a little bit that you weren't being college prepped if you went to VOTEC. I never felt, though, really any disrespect. I went to McDowell, and back then I went to 2 weeks on at VOTEC and 2 weeks off, which was great. You could really get your projects done, then come back to McDowell. But it was funny that when we would come back to McDowell, we were all put in the same classes together, the tech kids. We all went to the same history class, English class. And it's funny, when you go to a McDowell reunion, the VOTEC kids are always over in the corner. They still hang out together because that's the way they were trained. But I agree with what you're saying. I believe there's a stigma involved that everybody needs to go to college now. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but the hundreds of thousands in debt you come out with for maybe a business that doesn't hire and pay that well, you really need good guidance to get these kids into the right college and the right program. You know, Jack, you do some work with McDowell, and I don't know. I always, when I had my shop, tried to hire farm kids because they just knew how to do stuff. They just growing up on the farm, and that's the kind of kids that I went through with tech. It was the county tech school. So McDowell, we were like the city kids. Most of the guys out there were from real rural schools, and they did real well in life. They did fine. I still see some of them. They did fine without that education. I would probably guess that I hope it's not true. I hope they're sending their brightest kids to VOTEC that are really mechanically inclined, but I probably would say it's more of a place to put the kids that they're not quite sure if they have a career path. So maybe you should learn a trade. Yes, Bill. So the question is, a resurgence, can we ever get a resurgence to manufacturing back? Here's the dirty little secret. If I own a plastic shop, and this is nothing against the plastic shop owners, and I come to Phil and I say, Phil, how much to build a mold, to make this plastic cup? 2-cavity mold, 2 parts at once. And I say $27,000. Well, Phil, I can get that built in China for $5,000. Go build it in China. Well, now it comes back and it's not that good. It needs another $10,000 worth of tune-up, right? So we tune that up. I get to write that off as a repair. But people don't realize that. So double whammy. Because I got lost, not only did the shop in town lose the work, it went to China, came back, and then when the owner fixes it, he gets to write it off anyways. So, I mean, can it come back? Absolutely. And again, back to the radio show. If we can get the voice out there a little bit and talk to people about what's really going on and realize it's not hopeless, but the laws need to be changed. Some things need to be tightened up. They need to see industry come back into Erie so kids have faith in it. I mean, if you're a parent now, do you really want your kids to go into manufacturing? I don't know. I don't know that the wages are that good. They want things to be as low as possible because of the global competition, which isn't fair. So I hope it comes back, and that's my goal, is to get be a wheel, a cog in the gear to bring it back. But I'd hate to see it leave. I strongly believe I might be a traditionalist, but a country that doesn't build its own stuff is not much of a country. That's my opinion. And I'll always give again an honest answer, maybe to my detriment, but I have strong opinions on that. My research, I don't think NAFTA was the killer for at least the tool and die industry. I think the World Trade Organization, China, was worse. I think having a strong trading alliance with Canada and Mexico is probably really good. On the other hand, with some boundaries. And it breaks my heart to see what happened to the air conditioning company that takes their employees in Indiana, Carrier, and to watch that guy stand in front of 1,500 employees and axe them that day and say, we're doing this for the betterment of the company. Don't take it personally. I mean, and it's viral on YouTube. I don't know, millions and millions of views. It was heartbreaking. I don't care if you're even in manufacturing. So my take on that is, I don't think Mexico and Canada are the real problems. I think the Pacific Rim is the huge problem. And it's so bad, too. Maybe I've got the economics wrong on this. How do you send work over to this country, and as we slowly close down an industry here, the tool making, which is the backbone of manufacturing, tool making is, and as we slowly close it down, and we don't have the shops paying taxes. Then we don't have enough money. So who do we borrow the money from? China. It's like they got to wake up and laugh at us every day. This pitch themselves. This is so good. So the TPP is such a. I don't even know if anybody's read it, the whole thing. It's top secret. Some people were for it last week. They're against it this week. I don't even know what's in it, to be honest with you. I've been assured that it's so great, so good for America, but I don't believe anything these guys do anymore is being read thoroughly through, vetted with the chambers, vetted with manufacturing experts. What will be the impact? Maybe they are, but has anybody here heard even the bullet points of that agreement? Anybody? Like, can they put it on one page, the 10 things this thing does? I don't know. I don't think that even exists. So that's my opinion of that. Meadville used to be known as Tool City. I don't know if they still are. What I would believe is some of these guys, there were so many little shops, one or two guys, and maybe they were able to weather it. I have not heard a lot either way because they weren't very active in the not the chambers, but you didn't hear a lot about the little mom and pop shops. So I have no idea if they're still hanging in there, but I know a lot of them survived, I think, on overflow work from the bigger shops. So I do not exactly know the answer to that question, how Meadville's doing. Okay? Well, guys, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Very, very nice.